Hey, Doug.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I was just saying some nice things about you behind your back before you
Oh,
hopped on.
well, I wish I
So
had said something earlier
now
then.
I'll tell you anyway. Since we're going to be recording this and everything like that, everyone should know that you are Doug Roland and you are the director of the Feeling Through, but also the Feeling Through experience, right?
That's correct.
Right. And I'm Michelle Miller. I'm the editor of Film Critic. And my fantastic associate is the silent transcriber going on right now because Mercury's in retrograde and things are wacky. Um, but I'm really looking forward to this. Your film, I think, said so much in so little time.
Thank
It
you.
was really beautiful and was and I'll probably gush a little bit, but anyone who knows me knows that my effusiveness is entirely sincere. Um, I just thought that you had this economy with words, and then the visuals were so beautifully laid out. The relationships were so clear. And I just kind of want to know more about how you got into this and your background that brought you to this moment of really putting the first deaf blind character in a main role.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey and one that really, at least as far as feeling through is concerned, goes back about 9 years. I'm in LA now, where I live and have for about the past 8 years. But prior to that, I'm from New York City, and going back about 9 years ago, I was coming home late one night, and I saw a man standing on a street corner holding a sign that said, "I'm deaf and blind and need help crossing the street." Certainly, one of the first thoughts in my mind was that, oh wow, I've never met a deafblind person before. But I went up and I tapped him. He pulled out a notepad and wrote the bus stop that he needed, and I walked him over there. And when we got there, as is the case often late night in any city, if you missed a bus, it's not coming for a while. So I wanted to let him know I was going to sit and wait with him, and I didn't know how to communicate with him. And fortunately, kind of just instinctively just took his hand and started tracing one letter at a time on his palm, hoping that would work. And he completely understood it. And we ended up having a whole conversation that way of me tracing one letter at a time on his palm, him writing back in a notepad. And it was the thing that I took away the most from that conversation was that he was just this really charismatic, warm, funny guy who I felt like I'd really made a connection with, to the point where when his bus finally came, and we were giving each other a big hug goodbye, I was tearing up, and I'm like, I'm gonna miss my new friend because I really felt like I'd made a connection. It's a very New York thing to have a really
Totally.
like intimate, fleeting moment with a stranger who you feel like you all of a sudden know really intimately, and sometimes in certain ways more than your friends and family know each other, and then you just kind of go off your separate ways. But I guess in many ways, though it felt like the end of that story, it was certainly the beginning of the story, in that I immediately wrote a short story that was inspired by it that I then turned into a film. But it kind of lived on my computer for a number of years because I didn't feel ready to tell that story, and so it just kind of like lived on my computer for a long time. And it would be probably about 5 years later that through circumstances and just really a gut feeling, I just immediately knew I had to make the film. And I, the story actually goes that I was cleaning up the desktop of my computer because it was a mess, which just happens every once in a while. It
Typical
happens
for writers. Yeah.
all the time, and so I'm like going through and I'm opening folders I haven't opened in a while, and I open the one that has feeling through in it, and I read it, and instantly I had that like really deep gut feeling of like I have to do this right now. So like the next part of the story is not embellishment at all. I literally before my like conscious mind kicked in, I googled deafblind organization. I called the first number that pops up on Google. I have no idea who I'm calling, to the point where it's ring 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 ring, and some guy picks up and he's like hello, and I'm literally like, long enough to him go hello, and then I tell him verbatim. I remember this because it's just such a weird thing to say to someone who you don't even know who you're calling. I say, I don't know why I'm calling you right now, but I have a story to tell you, and I think after I tell you this story, it'll be more clear. And I told him about this encounter that I had had years prior, and then on the spot had not thought about this at all. But I go, and I think I want to cast a deafblind actor in the role. I say to him, is that crazy? Because at the time I'd still only met this one man, Artemio, did not know the community at all, and just didn't know if that was feasible, right? I'd never seen it, never heard of it, so I just didn't know. And he goes, no, that's not crazy at all. You should reach out to the Helen Keller National Center. So that started like a process of me reaching out to them, and then meanwhile being politely persistent because it took a number of times to connect with them. But in the meantime, I just started to instinctively kind of like just get to know the deafblind community in LA. I walked into the Braille Institute here. You know, it was like such a bleeding heart story for me because it was something that was so emotional for me because it really still lived very emotionally in me even years later. So I'd be like walk into the Braille Institute where I didn't know anyone and be the guy who like sits at the front desk. I'd be like pouring my heart out, telling him the story. And then he just goes, just walk down the hall, make a left, make a right, tell it to that person. And I just like kept telling the story over and over again until it led me kind of to, you know, get to know the community a lot. Went out to a deafblind living facility out here in LA and met a lot of people there. And then heard back from the Helen Keller National Center. They're based in Long Island, but they were like, hey, we're have a trip that happens to be out in LA on these dates. Can you meet? Ended up meeting with them, and we had this like 2-hour conversation where we just instantly connected. Sue Rosensky, who's actually now HKS is the parent organization that includes Helen Keller National Center. She's now the CEO of the parent organization. At the time, the executive director of Helen Keller National Center has just been, you know, an amazing partner along this journey, as has the organization. And really what started then was my real kind of education into the community, frequently going up to the National Center, connecting with so they have like a lot of staff there, but they also have a lot of students that live there for anywhere up to a year to learn independent living skills. So every time I went up there, I met with a ton of the staff, a lot of the students, constantly just meeting and talking with them through interpreters, of course, because I didn't know. So I still sadly have not really learned it as much as I would like. I wish I had a little bit more time to do so, but as I slowly pick it up, I have a great team of interpreters that I work with on a regular basis. And I worked with them to cast, you know, they set up a casting session for me with the deafblind community, none of which were actors. But you know, Chris Woodfill is the associate executive director there and is deafblind himself. Reached out to a lot of the deafblind community, some in New York, some across the country, to field interest. And we did a traditional casting session, except some of it was in person, some of it was remote. It's a very interesting chain of communication when you're doing a remote casting with a person who's deafblind. But again, great interpreters facilitate that. And midday of our first casting session, we'd seen several great people, but none of which really felt like quite the right fit. And we're like, have a little bit of time in between auditions, and someone in the room goes, hey, what about Robert? And then someone else goes, yeah, I feel like Robert would actually be a good fit. Hey, why don't we go get Robert? And Robert is deafblind. He you know, now with COVID things are different, but he had for many, many years been working in the kitchen at Helen Keller National Center.
I saw that on one of your videos. That was great.
Yeah, and he literally gets pulled out of the kitchen. He's not really told what's going on. So he walks into the audition room thinking like he's in trouble, like he's done something wrong. No. And they're like, oh, no, like this is Doug. He's making a movie. And then he instantly started cracking jokes about being a movie star. And like just his charisma and his warmth and his energy, I like almost immediately knew he was our guy. And we ended up casting him a little while later, and you know, hustled really hard to get it made. I did a crowdfunding to get it made. You know, with Helen Keller National Center as our fiscal sponsor, so it was all tax deductible donations. But you know, that's anyone who's done that, that's like a full-time job in and of itself. And then just really hustled to, you know, put together this great crew. Steven, who plays Tariq, is amazing. And tell me if I'm being too long-winded, I can totally stop.
I'm loving this. People aren't here to see me. No, I'm excited to hear about it because just taking a quick sidebar, Artie or Robert he is so charming. He's so immediately emotionally available, and he can't, because he can't mimic that. It's authentic. So there's something there. And Stephen is Tariq. Man, that kid has a lot of talent. He was so understated and nuanced, and I want to talk about his casting process as well,
Yeah.
because though this is based on on experience that you had, you obviously built it out a little bit, and I think your choice to cast a Black actor in this very tender role is really important, especially when we see him with the hoodie go up. There were a lot of things that, because things are so rife and so difficult right now, and the way Black men are portrayed is not often tender like that. And I thought it was this really beautiful buddy picture.
Yeah, that's totally super accurate. And, it's the casting, the story behind casting Steven was interesting. And actually, ironically, I think just given what assumptions might be, harder than casting Robert in a lot of ways. Robert, like, again, halfway through our first day of casting, he popped in the room. I'm like, this guy's perfect. For the part of Tariq, I saw a lot of people, and just it was, obviously it really hinges on finding the right person for both those roles, or it really doesn't work. And I had a really specific vision of who he was, not in his appearance, but in his energy. And
Mm-hmm.
we went through a lot of young actors, and many of which were really talented, but none of them felt like the right fit, to the point where I was actually really hounding our casting director. And that's a whole nother story I won't go into, but the point is, I was like, no, we don't have, like, I know I've seen like 40 guys, but we don't have him yet. Like, we
Right.
need to see more people. And Steven, our last, I was on a limited time with it. Once we got the funds, it was like a really short period to shoot this before it got prohibitively cold in New York, since we were shooting almost entirely outside at night. So like on my last day of possible casting, we'd gotten a couple like self tapes that came in right before, and Stevens was this very poor quality. Like, it was like both like he just like, whatever camera he was using and the lighting, you couldn't see him that well, couldn't hear him that well, but I kind of got something. I was like, I think there's something here. And he actually told me this story later. I didn't realize it till after, but on the way up, we were riding the elevator up together, and he was like, hey, do you know where he didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who he was. Do you know where the Feeling Through casting is? I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's us. We're all here. I'm like really busy. I'm not paying attention. And he was the first person to walk in the room that day. And the second he opened his mouth, I was like, that's our guy. And what's
Yeah.
really interesting about it, and, I have certainly his permission to tell this story, because he's not only told it a lot himself, but I've asked him if I can tell it if he's not around. And he's given me permission to do so. But it turned out just in a really kismet kind of way. Obviously, Tariq is someone who we meet who is struggling himself, and certainly in this short, we don't go too much into his backstory, but know that he has nowhere to stay, and he also is
Right.
in a situation for where, whatever reason, he doesn't feel comfortable telling these guys who seem to be his closest buddies what his situation is, while he's trying to kind of figure it out. And Steven, Steven's someone who brought such an authenticity to the role, not just because he's a great actor, but like, he's someone whose personal stories is such, where he grew up in Bed-Stuy during a time where certainly Bed-Stuy was like a rough neighborhood. It was,
Mm-hmm.
it was a really rough neighborhood when he was growing up there. And he, in his own words, got caught up with the wrong crowd when he was around 16 years old, and was arrested for armed robbery, and was either, depending on the leniency of a judge, was either going to get juvenile hall, or face like 7 to 10 years. And he
Oh
very
man.
fortunately got a lenient judge. And he, part of his like exit program from the juvenile hall program that he was in was, they asked him what he was interested in, and he said that he was interested in acting and dancing, and he went into this program called City Kids, and that kind of really helped him find his voice as an artist, coming out of that experience. And for him, he went around. He has a one-man show that he was doing for a number of years, of telling his story, and certainly one that never not been relevant, but all the more relevant now to what's been happening in the world. And one in which famously Prince William and Kate. Is she a princess or is she a
She's
duchess?
she's a duchess.
Duchess
I
Kate
don't pay attention
Middleton.
to the royals,
I
but
don't
yeah, I
know
think
about the royals, but
she's a
Prince
duchess.
William
Yeah.
and Kate Middleton came to see one of his performances and were like blown away by it. And he did his Stephen did his round of interviews because famously Prince William came up after and gave him his phone number and said, hey, I want to help you out if I can. But just to kind of give a kind of a little bit of a tidbit of the impact of his own story and certainly how it kind of naturally applies to certain things that Tariq, the character of Tariq's dealing with, and a lot of what Stephen echoed to me of really feeling a real synergy with this role and really felt like he was born to play it. It was just, it kind of found him in just this really, really, and again, at the 11th hour, we that was our last day. We were seeing people. So that was a really fortunate thing too. And Stephen just brings such talent and such heart into everything he does. So to have the two of them was really what ended up making it possible to have that kind of impact, I would say.
Yeah, it's I want to talk a little bit about the film more in specifics without taking too much of the surprise elements away. But something that I think you accomplished really beautifully was getting below the surface to the fact that someone can be blind and deaf and maybe have longing for not just friendship, but companionship or fear. And that, Tariq is actually more seen for who he is by someone who's blind and deaf through a pat, on the knee, or that hug than he was with his buddies who don't notice him scarfing down his food ravenously. This is obviously someone, asking for a swipe on your Metro card. That's a very specific thing that tells us immediately out of the gate that he's down on his luck. So yeah, let's talk about a little bit how that started to form for you.
Yeah, no, thank you for just really just beautifully articulating that. But is the question more around where that character came from, or what's kind of what?
Well, you know what? Because I deal with these more as conversations with anything else. Because there is I felt such a personal connection to it. And you as a director, so here's one thing that people might not understand is we think of sign language, but they don't realize somebody blind deaf, though you show the tracing out of the letters, that what it usually is to the hand, right? So
Right.
did you have
Yeah.
someone doing tactile signing for them? How did you direct Robert?
Sure. Well, a couple things on that. What's really interesting about the deaf-blind community, I think something that's really not understood for those like myself going back to prior to making this, and a lot of people who haven't interacted with the community, especially when you have a dual disability with dual sensory loss. There's quite a diverse spectrum of manifestations of that, and therefore communication styles. So the deafblind community certainly encompasses anyone who's fully deaf and fully blind, to anyone who is legally deaf and legally blind but has some use of their hearing and vision, and everyone in between that. So it's quite a diverse spectrum. There are Robert, our deafblind actor, he has pinhole vision that has glaucoma. So with the right distance and the right lighting, he can still rely on visually to see
Right.
if it's signed in a small window with the right lighting conditions. There are a lot of people in the community who communicate tactily, so through tactile ASL, which is ASL signed into the hand. Mm-hmm. What I stumbled upon when I was tracing one letter at a time on Artemio's palm, the man who I met years prior who inspired all this, is technically a form of communication too, called print on palm, which is certainly used at times. It's in the same way that someone who maybe comes to their hearing loss later may not have learned sign language, so they might still finger spell, which is just literally spell out every word one letter at a time. So there's different ways in which people sign too, depending upon when they learn sign language, what their preferences are. So certainly a real manifest of variety of communication modes. But as far as, again, one of the great privileges of aligning with the Helen Keller National Center at the start of this process was not just having access to their interpreting team, but also being able to build a rapport with them and have them know Robert really well. Because although a great interpreter can walk into any situation and facilitate any conversation, you're that much better set up for success in communication, particularly under strained conditions, which are outside at night in New York City on a film shoot and it's really cold, which is hard to communicate just period. The more rapport that you have with your interpreting team, the more accurate and the more shorthand you have, the more accurate that communication is going to be. But yeah, I think just kind of what I was kind of getting from what you were saying before, I think, this is, as far as some of the things that we give a view into our deafblind character Artie's world, and someone who, just like anyone else, is, longing for not just connection in a friend way, but in a lover and touching on topics of his own romantic life, is something that, often the disability community, and I have the privilege of speaking with people on a regular basis. I do a live stream every Friday called Feeling Through Live, which was born not just out of this, but out of the pandemic. We're going to have episode 27 tomorrow, and I get to speak with a lot of people from the deafblind, blind, and low vision communities, but also the disability community at large. And a topic that comes up often is the disability community being asexualized, and that they're being talk of them, having sex or having being in love, or these really basic and universal things that of course all people experience, but a lot of people don't, for whatever reason, given just ignorance or biases, don't want to entertain that with the disability community a lot of times. So I think, the theme and the moment that you're referencing is something that's really struck people, because it's something that is so universal, yet something that almost, I feel like a lot of the times the reaction to this is a really simple, oh, it's just, we're all just people. It's really, it is that simple. And sometimes, we never make any judgments. It's all about the feeling through experience is all about creating this collective, we've been doing these fully accessible screenings, first in person and now virtually. And it was not just to have personalized accessibility access for anyone who's blind or low vision or deafblind, but it was to have the deafblind, blind, and low vision community alongside the general public, to have a shared experience, to learn from each other in that experience, similar to the chance encounter that I had with Artemia that inspired all of this. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from those who aren't part of the deafblind, blind, or low vision community, who maybe don't know a lot about it coming into this, come out with this really deep, just this really deep understanding in this visceral way of the shared humanity, in a way that was maybe not thought about or maybe conceptual beforehand.
And it's disconnected. Yeah,
it's
disconnected
moments
from
that
it.
you pointed out that are the ones that I think really penetrate the deepest.
Yeah, and there is something that the characters of Artie and Tariq shares, that anybody who's worked in communities that have suffered economic hardship or blight, or who have also worked in disabled or communities of people suffering through illness, is there's this expectation that they should be saintly, oh, they should be so grateful, instead of being human beings with the full gamut and range of emotions and experience. So people want to beatify the people who are struggling with illness or varying ability, and then they want to villainize people who are on the other end of the spectrum economically. And they, again, don't allow for that full breadth of human experience. And when you see that happening, it's, as somebody who's worked in both communities in varying degrees, at the end of the day, we are all just human beings. We're so interconnected. And when we deny people the fullness of their experience, we're really denying their humanity. So I love that. So for people who hopefully will see this, I hope they turn into the Feeling Through experience, because I really loved, I only got to see a little bit of it, but the deafblind love story of Divya and her partner, I forget his name, and we don't have to go all into that because I want to stay on the film. But it's clear that you made a connection and a depth of connection with the community that I think is really moving because of the humanity. So
Thanks. Yeah. I think that's been, I think sometimes to be honest, I had heard storytellers say this before, but I never really understood what it was until feeling through and everything that's happened. But what I say is I was gifted with this story quite literally through like this chance encounter, right? It was something that was completely not planned, something that just kind of happened, but also everything that stemmed from it. To me, when you're talking about storytelling and kind of the ways in which I think come from the deepest places, it's not this kind of willful, like white knuckled kind of like execution. It's like it's this call and response and this listening and receiving. And to me, this kind of happened in the deepest sense of in the form of this chance encounter that sparked all of it, and then the ways in which my interaction with Artemio had such a visceral and deep effect on me that I felt I couldn't not pursue it in some way. I felt so deeply compelled, to show what I had experienced to other people that eventually turned into feeling through, and then the feeling through experience, that it was through the gift of of that encounter. And I do really feel like that I was gifted this experience, and it's a real privilege to be able to not just make the film and exhibit it, but the other things that we've done around it since then, and the ways in which I've been really embraced by the community. It is something where now 3 years into my active creation and exhibition of the film in partnership with Helen Keller National Center, I'm also the media director for HKNC and have been for quite a while. I've probably spoken with 6 deafblind people this week already on either Zoom or what have you, and way more through email, and that's a normal week for me. So I'm constantly connecting with the community. I have a lot of people in the community that I would call not just colleagues but friends, and it's really completely changed my life. It's not just like, cool, I did this thing and it was awesome and now we're on to the next thing. It's not just a daily part of my life still at this moment, but certainly changes the DNA of who I am as a storyteller moving forward in whatever the future stories are.
yeah, I think that, you can say that you were gifted this experience, but you were also available to receive it. I think that we are often, as storytellers and creators, we're gifted experiences, and how available are we to that breath of inspiration to come in, and to not just leave the door ajar for that, but to willingly usher it in the way that you have. It's not like you just were like, this is for a finite period. This is something, like you said, it's realigned your own DNA. So you're talking about at the core of who you are, which I think that tenderness and that investment comes through the piece. There is just, from start to finish, intention and intimacy throughout it. There's just nothing that's out of place. Even your use of New York City, as somebody who lived there for 12 years, I knew that bus line that you were that you put there. I was like, 196, know exactly where that is. That you would choose to take a city like New York City that gets a bum rap. People who don't live there don't understand that we can forge really quick and fast experiences with one another and connections like you had with Artemio, and also that's kind of how we buffer against the things that feel sharper. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, your use of the city and doing it at night when it's clearly cold? Like, the city has it's an animal. It's got a very specific personality at that time of year.
Totally. I love what you said about that. And again, as a lifelong New Yorker, and I've been in LA for the last 8 years, but born and raised in New York, lived the vast majority of my life in New York, and always a New Yorker. I say, no matter how long I live out in LA, I'm only rooting for New York sports teams, and I still identify as a New Yorker. No disrespect to LA. I love it out here too. But I think I think something that a lot of New Yorkers kind of laugh off a little bit, because there's such a disparity between what people from outside of New York say and what's the truth, is that I find New Yorkers to be some of the most helpful people in the entire
Yes,
world. I mean, as far as like going out of their way to help someone else, or like not being afraid or shy to go up and go like, oh, you look like you're lost, can I help you? Or, oh
exactly.
yeah, sure, like I'll show you, it's right down here. And being like really into like wanting to really make sure that person gets where they're going. It's like, no, no, okay, so this is what you're like, getting really like really
Yeah.
invested in that. And so that's definitely something that, and also just, I think there's something about the energy, the personality of the city, and also the anonymity of it that does create these really fast, really deep and intimate connections that might just be for that fleeting moment and only live for that 5 minutes or that 1 hour that it's happening. And then just kind of two people go off their own way never to see each other again. I certainly, as a New Yorker, have had many of those moments. You know, I've had someone late night waiting for a bus turn to me and just go, you know, I just lost my brother, and I just don't, you know what I mean? Like just turn to you, say that, and all of a sudden you're like talking to this person about this loss of a loved one, and maybe you ride the bus a few stops. It's like, hey, look, this is my stop, but I'm really glad you shared that with me. Like, I'm glad we met each other. Like, I'm Doug, by the way. Like, I didn't even get your name. And then you're
Totally.
off. That happens. I've never had anything like that happen
Anywhere
really
else.
anywhere else, and it happens all the time in New York. That's really a lot of the personality of the city. So certainly that's represented there. And also, what I love about New York is, you know, it's a city that never sleeps, and it's always crazy and busy, even at like crazy times of the hour. But there's sometimes like very late at night, early in the morning, there's this like little window of quietness where you're
Yeah.
almost like, oh wow, like it's actually quiet. There's actually no one around. And that was, I thought, setting it during that little window of time was also very much indicative of certainly where, in a kind of a reflection of where Tariq is at in his life. Someone who's very alone, even in like the busiest, most populated city, one of the most populated cities in the world. But also the intimacy that creates between two people when you're the only two people out, the only two people around. And certainly the function of that, of Tariq kind of grudgingly having to help Artie first because there's no one else around to do it. And he's like, I'm in a tough spot myself, but I guess I might as well just see this through. And it just takes on a life of its own and turns into like a night-long thing.
Well, and also because initially someone asks him for help and he's like, I got nothing to give. And I think that so often people forget that it's not just what you throw in someone's cup. You know, it's something else. And that you see him get filled up as he's going through actually making a real connection. And I love that you don't make him a saint either, without going into too many things, but that you see that there's a struggle. You see that again, there's humanity. There's his own desperation. And like you said with New York, one thing that you really captured was in those wee small hours of the New York nights was that even when it's quiet, you feel like there's always someone observing you. Like I felt so much more safe in New York City walking home at night at 2 in the morning because I always knew that there was someone was going to be in earshot.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, you know, and we're constantly in the city, you're rubbing up against each other. You don't get to escape to the quiet of a car and
Mm-hmm.
go and do what we do in LA or in other cities around the US where you just get very insulated. You're bumping up against people all day long,
Right.
you know, so you've got to start to, you know, you don't want to become calloused, but you also can't be too permeable there. So I thought that you got that balance.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's definitely something that's like, to me, it was funny because I was living in LA already when we were like in pre-production on this, and a lot of times people were like, "Why don't you just like shoot this in LA? It would be so much easier for you. It'd
Mm-mm.
be so like low cost." I'm like, no, like New York is a character in this story. Like it doesn't work anywhere else. Like this story doesn't work anywhere else. So like I know I'm traveling back and forth constantly, and there's like a lot more things to coordinate, but like that is the story. If I were to adapt it to somewhere else, it would lose the real essence of what it is.
Yeah, and people would know. You know, New York is one of those cities that it's really, yeah, some people go shoot in Toronto and stuff. But if you're not there, there's just such a palpable energy of that place. That is a cellular level that if you're not there, you can't manufacture it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I think that that was pretty remarkable. And also, you know, the knowing looks of people when you are helping somebody. I feel like everybody embraces that in New York City. So in that one moment where he's seen giving some aid, that it's kind of like this balm for the soul. So it was so clear that you had an intimate knowledge of the city as well. What was it like, you know, on the shoot with with the actors? How were they communicating? What did that look like?
Yeah, you know, it was so we didn't have that much pre-production time with the actors, so we really only had I got a chance to go up and meet with Robert a couple times individually, but we only had one very short rehearsal between Steven and Robert prior to actual shoot. Robert was working full time in the kitchen at that point, and believe it or not, his kitchen manager, even though I had cleared all this stuff with like the executive director and everyone above him, was like, oh, was a real thorn in my side of like giving Robert any time off from the kitchen to like even rehearse. It was like really I was to this day I'm still a little kind of pissed off about it because it was like so I'm like I have the approval of the executive director like he's like no we really need him, it's a busy day today, and I'm like I told you I was going to do this like months ago. Like you can't let him out, you know. So it was like this. Everything's a battle when you're shooting a movie.
My
But we
God.
did. We only had one proper, like very short rehearsal between the two of them. But they instantly like. I think Steven is someone who's just got such a great heart. Was really invested in what we were doing beyond the story, and the fact that this is the first film that co-stars a deafblind actor. That he was really just invested in like what this could do beyond just making a good movie. So like they hit it off right away. The shoot was really challenging. I mean, again, having a great interpreting team made the facilitation of the communication quite smooth. We did have to get creative with where we would break off and how we would light our little areas in order for Robert to be able to see, because he has this pinhole vision that's has glaucoma, but in complete night blindness, so 100% blind at night. So like trying to create like a lighting setting that wasn't like off-putting to him, where that could facilitate him seeing the communication, was certainly something that we had to navigate at first. But honestly, you know, and I was just talking about this in an interview last night, but you know, I think what was more challenging was the fact that Robert was a first-time actor. You know, and I've worked with first-time actors before, and I love it. I think if you can facilitate the right environment and you cast it right, you can get this deep authenticity that you can't get anywhere else. But one of the challenges too is helping empower that first-time actor to feel comfortable on set, to feel ownership over the role. Because I think a lot of the times the misperception of people who aren't actors, and I have a long history of being an actor myself, and you know, like certainly get both sides of it, is that it's not like the director telling you all the things to do and you executing it. It's really the director's there to help guide it, but it's your role, and it's like you need to be the captain of the ship when it comes to the role. Certainly taking like the director's kind of the wind, right? Like is kind of helping like shape it, but like you're the captain of that ship that's like in direct collaboration partnership with it. So getting Robert to like, Robert's such a hardworking guy who he's like, I want to do a good job for you kind of thing. And I'm like, I love you for that. But at the same time, forget about me. Don't worry about doing a good job for me. I just want you to get really invested in the story that we're telling moment to moment, and know that you're the right person to be here, because I wouldn't have chose you if you're not. So I just ask you to trust me on that, and then just let go of the rest. Don't worry about doing it right or wrong. And that took a while to break through that mindset. And again, that's just a first-time actor mindset, and that's a very common thing. There was a really great moment, actually, where Robert was really struggling a lot the first couple days, first like day and a half or two that he was on the shoot, really kind of, again, taking that ownership and feeling like it was his role. And there was this moment where, again, it was super cold. I'm pretty good with the cold, so maybe I would just be wanting to power through, and everyone else was like, yo, we need to go inside and like warm up. You know? So there was this one day where we had to keep like literally, and Robert, I make fun of him too because he's an Arizona boy. So he's not like, even though he lives in New York, he has thin Arizona skin. So he more than anyone kept wanting to go inside. So there was this one day where it was particularly cold. So like literally we were shooting in like 5 minutes. We would like be shooting for 5 minutes, then take like a 2-minute walk to go inside and be inside for 15 minutes and do that over again. You could imagine how horrible that is for a shooting schedule and the things that you're needing to figure out on the fly, particularly when you have a very short shoot to begin with. But there was this one moment where like it was like his nerves and the cold, and he just wasn't getting it. We were shooting this more involved scene, and we went back inside, and for the next like 45 minutes, I went through that scene with him micro beat by micro beat. And it was actually a really big turning point because I think a lot of the people in the crew like got what we were doing, but they're busy doing their jobs and they're not really seeing what's happening. And what ended up happening is we're all in this like pretty small holding space. And all, like they see Robert working so hard to get this, and they see me working with him like I'm talking about micro beat to micro beat, like 50 beats in like a 3-minute scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To really work it through. And all of a sudden, like halfway through this, I look up and I see everyone from the crew is like watching this, like with like kind of a real degree of respect and reverence for it. And I think something clicked of like a couple things. Like one, like how hard Robert's working to get this, to really make this happen. Two, yes, what does go into this that you wouldn't see in a normal situation? That's a fact. And there's nothing wrong about pointing that out. It's more involved. There's more of a process, particularly when I, as the director, don't sign, right? Like if I was like a really proficient signer and I was communicating with him directly, that's my shortcoming in this, right? Like it's like, so I think there was another level of respect from the crew when they saw that. And when we went back outside for that first take, he nailed it. We went through this, this establishing shot long take through the whole scene. He nailed it. And everyone ran up around him and was like patting his back and cheering for him. And that was a real turning point for him. It was after that moment that he really felt like he belonged there, and it was much smoother sailing from that point on.
And I was thinking about that. I mean, it's really beautiful that you were so hands-on with them and you did microbeats, because those microbeats created a really beautiful story, but it just looked like authentic discovery. And I imagine, having a background as an actor and a director myself, is how much relationship comes from us understanding our proximity to everything around us, to all those different sensory inputs, and how much discovery comes from those sensory inputs, and what that's like to have one not there and then another severely limited. So was there any improvising? Was there anything of that nature? Because it felt like it.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's definitely, I mean, to the sense that like the final product of what you see is very close to what was on the page, minus some stuff that got cut. But I mean, I think for me, a lot of it is like, I'm always a big fan of keeping that camera running, and in the editing room, like grabbing some stuff before we've really called action and grabbing some stuff after we've like called cut. There's certainly some really great reactions that I got that were not to what was happening in the scene, but like happening in between takes. And you use those because they're authentic and they're natural and they really fit the story. But it was also someone like Robert who, once he really kind of started to take ownership over it, he really gave some really great takes, and is just someone who, you hear it a lot, like, but he has the thing, right? He has charisma. Mm-hmm. That's very natural and inherent to him, and that's something you can't teach, like they say. And he has that, so like, that suited him well for giving some really great takes and some really great moments.
Yeah, that was pretty remarkable. And another logistical thing was, how much did he teach you on how he needed to be led? because it was so specific. When you're dealing with somebody who has difficulty seeing, we think that we take the arm under, it's over, or the hand to the shoulder. Was that him, or was that people from Helen Keller?
That's a great question. That was a collective effort for sure. I definitely, even prior to meeting Robert, had connected with a lot of people in the community, and a lot of the, I even like, Monica Godfrey Lear, who's the mobility instructor there. We had a sit down session together to talk through things like that. And then there were moments on set too where, we had a team of interpreters there, many of which I had built a rapport with, and certainly who have worked with the community very closely. And there was one moment where we were having some trouble with something logistically with Robert's cane, and someone suggested, "Oh, why don't you just have him like hand it to Tariq or put it over here?" And someone was like, "Someone with a cane would absolutely never do that. Don't
Never do it.
consider doing that." And for me, I hadn't said I would, but I was like kind of talking it out, and like instantly like was like, no, that's obviously completely off the table. So it's certainly like there was an education before it, and certainly an ongoing education still to this very day. I learn new things every day that I talk to someone, and certainly every live stream we do where I get to hear someone's story. So it's an ongoing education for me, certainly as someone who's non-disabled and in this case sighted and hearing, and I'm certainly not gonna at any point think that I know everything. I'm just someone who's constantly learning, and doing my best to support a community that I have really made a personal connection with, and do what I can, through media to provide a platform and help tell stories. And one of the things I've pitched to Helen Keller Services and Helen Keller National Center, that's a long-term goal of mine, is to create a department or a facility that helps empower deaf, blind, low vision, and other disabled storytellers to tell their own stories, both in front of and behind the camera.
Cool.
So that's definitely a long-term goal. But in the meantime, trying to support it through feeling through live and what we do around that.
Yeah, I hope people visit that. And that's something that I'll share on my platforms as well, because you're not just saying that representation matters. You actually have made representation matter in the day to day. And so are there any other stories other than what you've talked about with Helen Keller? What's coming down the pike for you as a director?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely a feature film version of Feeling Through, like absolutely. The question is two-pronged. One is from a storytelling standpoint, and from just a logistical production standpoint. It's certainly everything that's in that story has only gotten more relevant, given what's happened in the world over the last year, both with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter, with a lot of people feeling separate and isolated. And this message of the power of human connection is one that certainly only rings louder now than it did when we made it. The question is how, when you're telling a story that has to do a lot with touch, what is our world going to look like a little bit beyond this, right? I don't want to tell a story that by the time we're exhibiting it feels really outdated in how we're dealing with that. And look, I don't know, maybe, knock on wood, 6 months from now, we all have a great vaccine. It's like, oh, remember when we used to be afraid being each other or touching each other? That was funny. Or maybe a year from now, we're still kind of a little on edge about that. I don't know. So, that's part of it's like, I want to make sure that that's part of it. So there's a little bit of like waiting and seeing, while also wanting to know from a production standpoint how things are going to play out, as far as feasibility. Certainly, I'm still developing the script, but even if I had it ready to go, I'm like, I'm not going to shoot that right now,
Yeah.
So especially on like what would be more of like probably in like an indie film budget. So it's like, that's definitely the goal though. If that's the next thing, that's something that I'm really passionate about doing. It's something that I think is really important to do as the next step of this. And then kind of see where things go from there.
Yeah, and with all of that, we're talking about the things that we've missed recently as we talk about pandemic and then Black Lives Matter. I think there's so many things that dovetail into this film beautifully, but literally seeing what happens in the moment that Tariq tries to put himself in Artie's shoes, for someone to see what they miss if their eyes are closed, and they can't hear, and just what that is even for a moment, because what we're lacking so much these days is the ability to listen or experience one another, but just empathy, and that was a really beautifully accomplished moment of empathy. And again, like, just everything rang true throughout the whole film. I hope I get to see it on more platforms. I think it's really important and really beautiful
Thank you. I
piece
really
of art.
appreciate that. And I don't think you've gotten a chance to see the supporting documentary yet, have you? Because I'd be happy.
No, I haven't.
I think
Yeah,
you.
please send that.
Yeah, and also if you're interested, because we do still do pretty regularly the virtual version of the Feeling Through experience. If you're able to join, I'm about to announce the next one we're doing is going to be on October 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and then there's going to be, I think, 2 more in November. And I think that's a really cool way to tune in, because you get to see, again, it's, I was worried when we started doing this, because we had gone across the country doing 14 fully accessible screenings, with up to 50 interpreters and support staff at a single screening to provide that,
Wow.
accessibility. And we had gotten, as many as, at some cases, at our LA premiere, we had 300 people there, and we had like 30 plus people from the local deafblind community. So it's like, I was like, how do we simulate that virtually? But what's really cool is what we do is, having our ASL box, having our live captions, having a stream text link that's compatible with people who are Braille display users, and then having this chat box that ends up being a thing where when you see it light up with like hundreds and hundreds of people from all around the country and around the world, and kind of in real time sharing their thoughts and feelings about it, and then having an opportunity to ask questions, there's something that's super powerful about that. Just one quick anecdote about that to kind of underline how that can be like much more than you might assume. We were several live streams ago, basically I do like a 10-minute pre-roll that has like a couple trailers and has a couple videos of me introducing what's about to happen. But we also encourage people to say where they're tuning in from. So you see like hundreds of people going like, I'm from here, here. We've had as many as, like, on a single live stream, we had 40 states and 12 countries represented on like
Wow.
one live stream that we did. But we had one where someone early on wrote into the chat box. She wrote, "Hi everyone, I just got diagnosed with Usher syndrome, which is the leading cause of deafblindness, and I'm really scared and I don't know what to do." And within moments, like a half dozen people were like, "We got your back. Like, here's my number if you want to, talk to me. We'll help you out." And it just kind of was like, really gave a very clear indication of how much connection can still be fostered even in that virtual kind of environment. And again, it's, we go straight from Feeling Through straight into the documentary and straight into a live discussion and Q&A. And what's great about that is I theme them around different things. So this month is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so the panel is going to be themed around that. Robert will be joining us. Obviously, he can speak on his experience as not just an actor, but as working in the kitchen for many years. We have Chris Woodfill as the Associate Executive Director, who's deafblind himself, and also his main passion is to create more employment for the community. And then Joe Melillo, who works in the employment division of Helen Keller National Center. And we're going to be talking about that and have the ability for people to ask questions, of course, about the movie as well, but to also educate people around employment, specifically being that it's a month to do that. Not that it's not always relevant, but particularly relevant this month. But yeah, if you're able to, I'd be happy to just send you a link to the documentary.
Do send it. I'm totally game for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The live thing is what it's all about.
I would imagine. And I think you touch on something else when people talk about employment. Disability doesn't mean a lack of autonomy. So I think that because there seems to be something missing from people who don't know, that they think that there's lack in other areas, just like we talked about desire or ambition and it's still the full human experience. And so it's wonderful that in these light touches that you give throughout your film, that it's all there. you know, and it's really, it feels like it's just about paying attention. And instead of seeing people as other or different, you know, the moment of what you've never seen a deafblind guy before, in the same moment of almost being like you've never seen a black kid before. Like there's this moment of communion with people who get othered, which I think everybody feels to some extent. Um, so it was a beautiful film about connection. I wish I could sit and talk longer, but I'm going to have to move on. And yet, so I want people to go to the Feeling Through experience. I'll be sharing this on my platforms and with other filmmakers. I think that you're doing really important work. And I'm excited that I get to continue the conversation with you at another time.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I got to say, like, if there's anywhere where I can read more of your work, or I can tell by the way in which you conduct an interview that you are really, really good at what you do. So I'd love to check out also anything else that I can read of yours, or if you could direct me to anything on that, I would love to do that.
Oh, that's awesome. You and I will just have to like have a whole Zoom conversation about the many incarnations of my life and career as a actor, singer, and you know, Broadway track person, storyteller who's been on every side of the camera.
Yeah,
So I
awesome.
think that I love talking to storytellers and creators, and um, this just type of engagement I think is really cool. So I'm feeling with you as you're talking about your story. So this is
Yeah.
great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Doug. You've been super gracious. And this link will be up on the Film Critic blog. I'll send you a link to it when it's up.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. Take good care.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.